So I was asked to talk about leadership and how someone who was born in Havana, Cuba, can somehow, through Mexico, work his way up to a corporate office. I generally speak about what I have learned from other leaders, because I think that's more accurate as to how people learn about leadership. I've thrown in some examples about my experience at Kellogg. So I'll try to do a little bit of both, but please, this is not a lecture about, you know, this is how I did it and therefore that's the way to do it, because that just wouldn't be accurate. The first thing I'm going to say about leadership is that I have known leaders throughout the world. I worked in Mexico, I worked in Canada, I worked in the US, worked in Asia, worked in Latin America, and I've known Anglo leaders, I've known black leaders, I've known Hispanic leaders, I've known Asian leaders, I've known leaders who are tall, I've known leaders who are short, I've known stocky leaders, I've known very thin leaders. I've known extroverts who are leaders, and I've known leaders who are painfully shy, who are great leaders. So, you know, there is no set profile for this. And at one time, for those of you who follow business, there was it was in fashion to think of the person of Jack Welch of General Electric as the prototype of a leader. Well, what does that mean? That we all have to be like extroverted, fast-talking Irish Americans? Because that's one style, but that doesn't mean that you have to adapt that style. You are who you are, and that can take you to leadership, and I'm sure it's taking you today for many of you in this room. So don't get fooled by prototypes. I ran Kellogg Mexico for 5 years. And I had grown up in the Mexican company, so it was kind of natural that I would eventually lead that subsidiary. So after doing it for 5 years, we were relatively successful. We had a good run. I was having a talk with my boss, and I said, I'd like to get a new job. I've done Mexico for 5 years. I need a new challenge. He said, well, what are you thinking about? I said, well, I'd like to go to an Anglo market. And in the Kellogg world, an Anglo market was a market with the high per capita consumption. So US, Canada, UK, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia. And he was very puzzled. And I didn't understand why he was very puzzled. Are you sure you want to go to an Anglo market? Why don't you want to be like president of Latin America? That's a huge job. That's bigger than, no, I want to go to one of these markets that are challenging, and that's where the competition is, and that's where you really get to know the business. And he kept asking me, and I kept answering, what's going on here? And finally I realized what he was really asking me. It was, Carlos, you're a Latino. I'm not sure that Latinos can lead non-Latinos. And I'm glad I didn't get it, because maybe he could have been able to convince me. But I thought about it later, and that's what he was asking me. Why don't you just stick to leading Latinos? That's who you are. And that's the part that we should never fall for. It's just not true. And Latinos can lead Anglos, Anglos can lead Latinos, African Americans can lead Anglo. It just, there are no set formulas here. And I'm so glad I didn't understand the question back then, because maybe it would have just totally freaked me out, and maybe I would have thought I missed something. But if you ever wonder if you can lead people who are different than you are, don't think about it too much. The answer is yes. Every leader, every great leader I've come across has a certain will, a will to lead. They want to be leaders. I know a lot of people who want to be boss, but that doesn't mean that they have the will to lead. And the will to lead, I'll tell you, some of these folks, they love the pressure. They love to get up in the morning knowing they're going to have a tough day. They love the grind. They love the struggle. They love the idea that the Whatever it is they're running is on their shoulders. And they actually look forward to getting to the office because they're going to be confronted with a massive, massive issue. When I made it to the Kellogg company, my first year and a half was actually pretty much of a disaster. And I think the first year and a half for a lot of CEOs are very difficult. And then we were trying to buy, at that time, a company by the name of Keebler. And it meant having to convince the board that to let me borrow $6 billion. Our stock had gone from 5 years before, it was like at 40. Then it was at 21. We had raiders all over us sending letters to the board saying, we want to buy your company. So the board is thinking, maybe we should sell the company instead of letting this guy who's had a pretty tough year and a half borrow $6 billion to buy a company. We had to convince Keebler that we are the right company, that we had the right price. So it was a very tough 6 months. We finally bought the company. And one day I was sitting in my office with my general counsel, and I said, well, what do you think? We got this thing done. It's amazing. Had the glory of the press release and the press conference and the whole deal. And she said, this acquisition was an act of sheer will. Sheer will. I thought it was an act of strategic mastery or financial acumen or marketing prowess, that we were able to figure out that this was the right firm for our company. And she was right. It was an act of sheer will, because there were so many days where it would have been so easy to say, look, this thing is just too complicated. It's not going to work. Let's just forget about it. But we didn't. Second thing that I've learned from great leaders is that they all have this sense of self-awareness. And I'll tell you, I wish I would have known this 30 years ago. Because as I was growing up and getting bigger jobs and starting to lead people, I realized today I was obnoxious. Because I thought that the role of a leader was to do all the talking, to be always the smartest person in the room, to make every decision, and to have every answer. And by the way, don't let anyone beat you in a debate, because you're the leader. And you can imagine how wrong that was. And here I was thinking that's the way to go. That's the way to. No one is good at everything. And great leaders understand that. And they know what they're good at, and they know what they're not good at. And they have the self-confidence to be open about it. It's very liberating once you get there. This is who I am. I'm good at this. I'm really not good at that. In fact, I really don't like to do that stuff. So I'm going to surround myself with people who do like to do that stuff and build a team. And obviously that's where diversity comes in, where you can't do that if you build a team with people who are just like you are. So, a team of, say, white males who love to golf together on weekends. I mean, what new ideas are going to come out of that group? Or imagine a group of 7 introverts. They don't talk during meetings, right? So, I mean, you've got to look for people who have what you don't have. As I was growing up, I had a secret weapon. And that secret weapon, growing up in the business world, was a role model. And his name was Roberto Goizueta. He was a Cuban American also. So for me, that was amazing. I think I was in Mexico. I was in Mexico 1982. I was running Kellogg Mexico. All of a sudden, a Fortune magazine copy comes on my desk. And there's this guy who's just become chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola company, a Cuban American. I couldn't believe it. So for me, that said, I can do that. I mean, if he can do it, maybe I can do it. But I have someone to follow. I have something to read about. I have someone to emulate. And the amazing thing about this man, he passed away in 1996, is that he had a very strong Cuban accent when he spoke English. He was shy. He wasn't a backslapper. He wasn't someone who was going to motivate the sales force. He wasn't some, you know, but he had an amazing mind for strategy, especially financial strategy. He knew how to create value. It was almost instinctive. So what he did is he picked as his number 2 person a guy by the name of Don Kehoe, who was just the opposite. He was a backslapper. He was an extrovert. He loved to give speeches. He loved to motivate the sales force. He loved to be out with the customers. And you look at what they did together for 12, 14 years, it's amazing. But it was that self-awareness of understanding that I can't do this job alone. And unless I find someone who can do the things I don't like to do, I'm going to fail. When I did become CEO, I made some awful people decisions. And I wasn't thinking in the sense of self-awareness and how do I, you know, compliment myself. And I think I was trying to impress people. And I hired all these amazing, you know, amazingly gifted people with these Harvard MBAs and #1 in their class at Harvard. And maybe I was trying to impress the board. At the end of the day, I like to communicate with employees. I like to set strategy. Part of the job of a CEO is to manage the board. You have to manage investors. So you've got things to do. And if you don't do that, nobody else does it. I don't really love, you know, if I have to do it, I do it, but I don't really love to be the guy who, you know, comes into the meeting and starts screaming at people because they're not making their numbers. So I decided to make this tough Aussie, who I had in the company, the president and COO. And you couldn't find a more different pair than this Australian and this Cuban American. And I'll tell you something else. He and I didn't like each other. So when it came down to who do I have dinner with this weekend, believe me, I would have not picked my COO. But he had what I didn't have, and I had what he didn't have, and it was good for the business. So I made him COO, and we did well together. We pushed the business. We had tough moments, but we pulled it off. Third thing is believe in something bigger than yourself. I'll tell you, people can see this in days or minutes when someone is out there looking for their own self-interest. So you're working for someone and you know that what they want is to get ahead. They're always thinking about their future. They're always thinking about looking good. They're always thinking about their personal goals, but they're not thinking about their people. And people can smell that. They don't believe in something bigger than their career. So people will follow, they'll work for you, but they're not going to follow you. And they work for you because they have to. But watch out the day when you need support. The amazing thing about the decision that Goizueta made to make Kehoe his number 2 is that Kehoe was his competitor for the top job. And there were people on the board who thought that Kehoe should have been made CEO, not Roberto. But he chose Kehoe. Why? Because the business comes first, because the institution is bigger than me, because if Kehoe ends up beating me, then maybe the institution needs a better leader. And I tell you, people see that. They sense it. So the last thing, which is one of my favorite insights, again, I wish I would have known this 25 years ago. Simplicity. Great leaders understand simplicity. And they understand that complexity does not equal sophistication. And that their role is to communicate, not to impress. When I got to be CEO of Kellogg, I used to say, look, the problem isn't that we don't have a vision. The problem is that we have too many visions because everybody's got their own consultant, their own 45-minute PowerPoint that nobody understands. So we went back and we used an insight from a famous Cuban poet by the name of José Martí. And he once said, look, our wine is bitter, but it's our wine. So he said, let's throw out all these consultants. Commercial diplomats are okay, but these other consultants, we're not. We're in the business of commercial diplomacy, by the way. And we threw out all the consultants. And we said, look, our charts are clunky, but they're our charts. And our strategy may sound a little bit unsophisticated, but it's our strategy. And we got it in our gut, and we understand it. And we can explain it to people. And we know what we want to do. And they're going to know what we want to do. And they're going to know what to do. And it was that moment when we stopped hiring people to tell us what our strategy should be, and we just got it in our guts and put it into our own words, that things started turning around. If at some point you're in a meeting room and you can't understand someone, it's not your fault.